He survived war for his country. His own country stole his eyes. February 12, 1946, the uniform still fit him with pride. Sergeant Isaac Woodard Jr. had just stepped off a military bus for the final time. After 3 years in the Pacific unloading ships under fire, earning medals for courage most Americans would never witness, he was finally going home. Home to South Carolina. Home to his wife. Home to freedom. The freedom he had fought for. But in the Jim Crow South, a black man in uniform was seen as a threat. On a Greyhound bus in Batesburg, he politely asked the driver to use the restroom. Minutes later, that driver summoned police, accusing him of talking back. See, the thing is, back then, a lot of whites, especially in the South, were offended to see a black soldier in uniform. So, most likely, he did ask politely, but yet that driver took it as an opportunity to call the police on him. So as saying, 2 white officers came into the bus and dragged him into the night. No questions, no humanity, just rage. Their nightsticks came down on him again and again. The blows crushed bone, split skin, and destroyed his vision. "Let me see," Isaac begged. Chief Linwood Shull answered by driving his baton straight into Isaac's eyes. The man who survived war never saw light again. The next morning, he awoke in a cell, blinded, bloodied, alone in the same uniform that should have guaranteed him honor. And what followed was not justice. Shull stood trial, and an all-white jury freed him in less than 30 minutes. No apology, no accountability, no justice. But America was watching. Newspapers told his story, and Orson Welles spread it across the radio. The NAACP demanded action. When President Harry Truman learned what was done to a black soldier still wearing his medals, he vowed this must not happen again. And that vow shattered the U.S. Army's racial barriers. That vow helped launch the modern civil rights movement. And that vow was born from Isaac Woodard's stolen eyes. He lived the rest of his life in darkness, but he lit a fire this nation could never put out. Black veterans didn't just fight overseas, they also fought the moment they came back home. Sergeant Isaac Woodard Jr., a soldier, a hero, a sacrifice America spat on. Thus, a sacrifice America should never forget. This is a series that some of you will get and understand, and others will assume off the thumbnail and not bother to check out the video, while others will watch but really not pay attention because of preconceived notions of what you want to hear. So what Dr. Price spoke yesterday is timeless and applicable for today because it's rooted in Jesus. There is only one race, and it's the human race, especially according to God. But that's the way we all should look at each other. But it's not how we as people see ourselves, be it as one. So therefore, racism is a sin that Satan perpetuates on 2 fronts. The outward, which is the color of your skin, and the inwards, which is the emotion that fuels blame and hate. A lot of people today have a false fixation that racism has been abated, that it's gone. But realistically, it's been suppressed in their minds. And social media is a cesspool of truth and hatred. And this is why Pastor Price's lengthy teaching on the subject needs to be heard from now until the end of time. Because as long as sin is a tool of Satan, then there is racism ready to rear its ugly head. If Jesus was a man of color, then that's simply part of the reality God chose. Recognizing that truth doesn't diminish his divinity or his mission. It actually strengthens it because God works in real history through real people in real cultures. So while salvation doesn't depend on his skin tone, teaching the truth matters because misrepresentation has long been used to enforce lies, create division, and feed self-hatred or superiority complexes when we hold to truth, whether about Jesus' identity, the gospel, or anything else. We honor God as the God of truth. Now, here's Pastor Price.
This is gonna blow you away. This is okay. In Sex and Race, Volume 1, page 91 and 92, Rogers asked a provocative question. Quote, were the Jews originally Negroes? Now, y'all gonna have to protect Pastor. Because I don't want the sword of Gideon trying to find me somewhere. All I'm doing is quoting from a book. It's not me saying this. This is Sex and Race, Volume 1, page 91 and 92. Rogers, who is a historian, asked a provocative question. Were the Jews originally Negroes? And here's why he says that. Watch this. Were the Jews originally Negroes? Only 70 Jews, 70 Jews went to Egypt. But according to the Bible, more than 600,000 men, 20 years old and up, left Egypt, which must have meant an additional 2 or 3 million women and children. Since the Jews were slaves, their women were undoubtedly concubines of the Egyptians, just like black women were concubines of the white slave masters and slave owners. Two black people cannot produce a mulatto. Two black people cannot produce a quadroon. And two black folk cannot produce an octoroon. Take some white in a pot somewhere. And I said this before, and people get upset. Now, don't be upset. I didn't call you a name. But these are the terms. And see, all these kind of sticky terms that I use, I don't use these terms. Like house nigga, field nigga, niggers. I don't use those. We never have used those terms in our house. I'm talking like this because that's the kind of stuff that's in print. This is the kind of stuff that's on these programs that we hear and see. This is the kind of stuff that they say in the movies, and this is the way y'all talk out there on the street. And so I use the term folk got upset about. I don't mean any harm by this, but this is just true. Where do you think all these yellow Negroes come from? These high yellows, they're still Negroes. You know where they came from? They came from the concubinage of the white slave master. There ain't no way the black slave could go into Masa's house and take Masa's daughter. Ain't no way that was gonna work. So Massa had to go out to the slave quarter and take the slave's daughter. And that's where all these strange colors come from. You go into darkest Africa, you ain't gonna find no yellow folk like this. You won't find no high yellows there. As such, not as original Africans. Okay? Now pick up on this. This is a marvelous thing that this man is saying, to us. And we need to realize this. He says that more than 600,000 men, 20 years and old and up, left Egypt, which must have meant an additional 2 or 3 million women and children. Since the Jews were slaves, their women were undoubtedly concubines of the Egyptian and must have produced mixed offspring. After more than 400 years of slavery, almost every trace of the first 70 Jews must have been lost, together with their culture, sound just like black folk in America. Amen. Same thing. Okay? After more than 400 years of slavery, almost every trace of the first 70 Jews must have been lost, together with their culture. Thus, Jewish culture was the Egyptian culture. To get an idea of what must have happened to those original 70 Jews, think of what has happened to Negroes in the United States who came here in hundreds of thousands over a period of centuries, and not all at once as the Jews did in Egypt. In other words, the 70 went to Egypt at one time, but the blacks were not brought in at one time. They were brought in over quite a few hundred years. Watch this now. Negroes are so Americanized that were it not for their color, one would forget that they ever came from Africa. Now watch this. The Falashas, or black Jews of Ethiopia, are probably very ancient. They claim lineal descent from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Call themselves Beta Israel, which means the chosen people, and observe the Passover. End of quote. In Sex and Race, Volume 1, page 28, Mr. Rogers says, and I quote, increasingly, it is being said in the most informed scientific circles that the Negro was the ancestor of the human race. Henry Fairfield Osborn, late head of the American Museum of Natural History, head of the American Museum of Natural History, who had himself a strong tinge of white fanaticism, said, Negroid stock is even more ancient than Caucasian or Mongolian man. Henry Fairfield Osborn was a white man. Now, from Man Rises to Parnasius, page 201, Princeton, New Jersey, 1928. Men of the Old Stone Age, quoting, Men of the Old Stone Age, page 262, 278, and 279, 1918. Mr. Rogers goes on to say, Griffith Taylor says, and I quote, a major principle of ecology tells us that the Negrito was therefore the earliest to develop of the 5 races. From environment, and I quote, from environment and race, page 230, London, 1927, environment and nation, on page 87, Chicago, printed in Chicago, 1936. Rogers continues, there were several of these put together. It might sound a little confusing, but you get the tape and you'll be able to go back and get it. Rogers continues, Professor W.K. Gregory, in the illustrated front piece of his book, entitled, and I quote, Our Face from Fish to Man, end of quote, gives the Tasmanian Negro as the first man. René Verneau, head of the Paleontological Institute of Paris says, and I quote, recent discoveries seem to indicate that the Negro element preceded the white and the yellow everywhere, end of quote. From, and I quote, Huxley Memorial Lectures for 1924. See, this stuff, they've been knowing about this stuff. You didn't get none of this in school. They didn't tell the black folk about it, and they didn't tell the white folks about it. 1924. Huxley Memorial Lecture for 1924 on page 20. Rogers is a historian, so he's putting all these different things together. All this is in his book, but he's quoting from other authorities and authors, so that's why I Try to keep all this together. Huxley Memorial Lectures for 1924, page 20, Rogers continues, and I quote, Griffith Taylor adds in support that the Negritos, or little Negroes, were the first in Europe. After the Neanderthal, a near-human Negroid type, and that the Negritos introduced their culture all over the world. The original color of primitive man was black. He says, now, in a book entitled, going to another place now, in a book entitled The Greek Historians by Godolphin, copyright 1942, Random House Incorporated, in the book called Herodotus, chapter 104 and 105, on pages 130 and 131. Now, Herodotus was considered the father of history. Now watch this. Quoting Herodotus, who, by the way, lived 500 years before Christ and was called the father of history. Quoting, there can be no doubt that the Colchians are an Egyptian race. Before I heard any mention of the fact from others, I had remarked it myself. This is Herodotus talking. After the thought had struck me, I made inquiries on the subject both in Colchis and in Egypt. And I found that the Colchians had a more distinct recollection of the Egyptians than the Egyptians had of them. Colchis, this is my insertion now. Colchis, by the way, was an ancient province in Asia, east of the Black Sea. Going on to quote Herodotus. Still, the Egyptians said that they believed the Colchians to be descended from the army of Sesostris. My own conjectures were founded first, get this now, first on the fact that they are black-skinned and have woolly hair, which certainly amounts to but little, since several other nations are so too. But I further and more especially on the circumstance that the Colchians, the Egyptians, and the Ethiopians are the only nations who have practiced circumcision from the earliest times. The Phoenicians and the Syrians of Palestine themselves confess that they learnt the custom of the Egyptians. And the Syrians who dwell about the rivers Thermodon and Parthenius, as well as their neighbors, the Macronians, say that they have recently adopted it from the Colchians. Now, these are the only nations who use circumcision, and it is plain that they all imitate herein the Egyptians. With respect to the Ethiopians, indeed, I cannot decide whether they learned the practice of the Egyptians or the Egyptians of them. It is undoubtedly a very ancient date in Ethiopia, but that the others derived their knowledge of it from Egypt is clear to me, from the fact that the Phoenicians, when they come to have commerce with the Greeks, cease to follow the Egyptians in this custom and allow their children to remain uncircumcised. I will add a further proof of the identity of the Egyptians and the Colchians. These two nations weave their linen in exactly the same way. And there is a way, and this is a way entirely unknown to the rest of the world. They also in their whole mode of life and in their language resemble one another. The Colchian linen is called by the Greeks Sardonian, while that which comes from Egypt is known as Egyptian. In his book entitled, that's the end of quote. In his book entitled From Superman to Man by J.A. Rogers, copyright 1968 by Helga M. Rogers, page 18 and 19, historian J.A. Rogers says, Aristotle in his Physiognomy, chapter 6, distinctly mentions the Ethiopians as having woolly hair and the Egyptians as being black-skinned. Now, every movie you have seen about Egypt, Pharaoh, dogs and the cats are all white. The only time you see a black is when he's a slave. All right. Now, Rogers goes on to say, and I quote, Count M.C. de Volney, author of The Ruins of Empire, says, the ancient Egyptians were real Negroes of the same species as the other present natives of Africa. End of quote. De Volney further states in the same work, says Rogers, quoting again, to the race of Negroes, well, watch this now. To the race, now this de Volney was a Frenchman, so he'd be classified as white. Okay, now watch this now. And I'm quoting, to the race of Negroes, the object of our extreme contempt, we owe our arts, sciences, and even the very use of speech. End of quote. They didn't teach us this in school. Only thing they taught us is that we came over on slave ships and picked cotton. That's about it. I mean, really. You know, overall as a whole. All right, now. Admittedly, the references we have looked at thus far could certainly be classified as past history. So let's bring it closer to our day and time. In an article in the Washington Post, another Negro-owned and operated publication, the Washington Post, copyright 1994. The Washington Post, November 16, 1994, Wednesday, final edition, byline by Boyce Rensberger, Washington Post staff writer, I quote, the overwhelming conclusion of anthropologists, in short, is that no physical features distinguish any race, not even a combination of traits that will do the job. We all descended from black people. We walk by faith, not by sight.
So today we're diving into a question that stirs a lot of debate and confusion. Are the Jews really Negroes? Now, before we can answer it, we have to understand that the word Jew has never described a race. Judaism is a faith and a culture that began in the Middle East. That's why you'll find Jews who are black, brown, white, and everything in between. The Jewish identity spreads through family and conversation, not through skin color. Now, it's absolutely true that black Jews have existed for centuries. The Ethiopian Jews, known as Beta Israel, are a powerful example. There are also black Jewish communities throughout Africa and diaspora. And their existence proves that Judaism has always included people of African descent, but it doesn't mean all Jews are black, nor that Jewish identity belongs exclusively to one race. Some modern groups, often called Black Hebrew Israelites, teach that black people, especially African Americans, are the true descendants of ancient Israel and that modern Jews are imposters. But this belief comes from specific identity movements and not mainstream history. Historians, archaeology, and genetic studies don't support the idea that all Israelites were black or that only black people descend from them. Now, what the evidence actually shows is that Jewish communities around the world, whether Ethiopian, Yemeni, Moroccan, or European, share deep Middle Eastern roots. They may look different. They may look different today because of migration and centuries of living in different regions. But their ancestry still traces back to the ancient Middle East. No modern racial group can claim Israelite identity exclusively. So, what did the ancient Israelites look like? They were brown-skinned Middle Eastern people, not the European images Hollywood created, and not the West African look that some people claim today. And it's important to remember that our modern racial categories didn't even exist in biblical times. A lot of the confusion comes from pushing back against centuries of whitewashed biblical art and the media. And correcting that is important. But replacing one extreme with another isn't the answer. The truth is what matters. And here's the bottom line. The Jews have never been one race. They've always been one people. Black Jews exist. White Jews exist. Brown Jews exist. The ancient Israelites were Middle Eastern, and today's Jewish people reflect thousands of years of global diversity. Now, if this helped bring clarity and truth, make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe for the next episode in the Race, Religion, and Racism series. I'm Minister Marvin Fant. Remember to continue to renew your mind. And I'll see you in the next one. Enough said.